everybody. Welcome to Truth Teller Tales. I'm Ellen, where I am dedicated to be interviewing the warriors who have had insight and unwavering faith during this most incredible time in history. And I believe that their stories will be studied and told for generations to come. So today, it's super cool. I'm very excited that we are interviewing a warrior and a patriot from Canada, DCLidstone. So cool to have you join me. Yay, there you are. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. You're so cool. You look awesome. I love it. Thanks for doing this.
No problem. Glad to be here.
Good. I appreciate it. Well, first of all, I just have to tell you, I enjoy your show so much. So, will you just briefly to start out, just let people know where you are and what you're kind of doing right now?
What do you mean by where I am? Sorry.
Where you are is social media wise,
Oh,
kind of
okay.
what you're.
Yeah, you can find me on X, and I have a Rumble channel where I do my show. I also have a True Social account, but I don't really post over there very often. So it's the same. True Social, you can find me at Lidstone, just Lidstone.
Okay.
And on X, it's at DCLidstone, and it's the same for Rumble at DCLidstone.
And your shows, I have just, been recently, it's newer show, but um, it's just really has such traction because all the information you have and then the guests you have on is just the information is so cool. And and you have a big one with Mr. Truth Bomb coming up, and it's just really incredible information. So I just want you to know I personally really enjoy your shows for sure.
Thank you.
And so now is the fun part. I want to start out just hearing about you. I just feel like the people like you who are out there understanding the truth and getting the word out there have stories that are different and similar. And so I just love hearing about your story, all of your stories. So tell me from the beginning, where you were born and kind of your family life growing up a little bit.
Well, I was born in Eastern Canada on the island of Newfoundland. Um,
Wow.
Yeah, it's a remote island. It's the furthest landmass out of North America. It's basically
Wow.
just under Greenland, if you're familiar with the geography. I lived there till I was about 14 years old, and then my family we moved to Western Canada, and I've been out here ever since.
So is
Uh,
Western Canada different from where you were born and lived the
oh,
first part of your
absolutely,
life?
absolutely. It's completely different cultures from east to west in Canada. Newfoundland is a primarily a fishing place. I mean, there's a bit of history there too. Most people, a lot of people don't know this, but the Newfoundland is where the Vikings settled
Oh,
500 years before Christopher Columbus came. So this was the first. This was the first spot Europeans had landed in. Like I said, 500 years before Columbus, which put it about 1000 A.D. And where I grew up was not too far away from that spot where the Vikings had landed. Um, and actually, a little bit more history come forward a bit. Uh, Before World War II, Newfoundland was its own country, and
oh,
the United States, the U.S. Navy, actually, and the U.S. Air Force had built most of the infrastructure on the island. The island before that was primarily just small fishing villages. And during the war, uh, because of its strategic location, the U.S. military came in and started building a lot of the stuff to be able to transport things from North America to Europe. And so the town that I grew up in, which was a very small town when I was growing up, of only about 4,000 people, but during the war there was about 80,000 people living there, and it was
wow.
the largest and the last airport leaving North America to go to Europe. So presidents stopped there. Tons of very important people would go through there. And now, when I was a kid growing up, all of this stuff from World War II was all derelict buildings. So as a
Mm.
kid growing up, this is where we used to play on the air base and all of these underground bunkers that had cannon platforms to shoot German U-boats out of the water. Yeah, you're a young kid and you're running across these cannon platforms and these underground uh, I don't know, compounds basically where they kept ammunition and stuff for the war. It was a great place to grow up, and it was very remote, so there wasn't like a lot of people. You're on an island, so if you don't know anybody, that's very rare to see that. And so it was
And
a
so
safe place growing up, and very interesting and full of history and culture. But then when you go across to Western Canada, it's a
yeah.
completely different culture. It's not the fishing villages, it's cowboys, it's oil field, it's mountains, and so very, very, very different. And so we moved to British Columbia when I was 14, 15 years old, and having to adjust was a bit of a thing, but did it. Um, so I lived in
How
British Columbia
was
for most of my adult life, but then it was about 2012 I moved out to Alberta and got into the oil field business. So I did
Oh,
that for years out there, and then it was about 7 years ago my wife and I, we decided to move back here to BC. So
well, I have so many questions. So, first, when you're, um, the first part before you moved, when you're this living on the island, so it was a safe feeling, but exploring, there must have been, because you said of all those remnants that were there must have been a lot of things to explore during all that, which probably, and then you probably learned all about what happened there too,
hmm well, Newfoundland's an
right?
interesting place, right? Like the Titanic sank only just right off the coastline.
Oh,
So
no
when the
way.
Titanic sank in 19, I think it was 1911, 1912, all of the people that were rescued, they were brought to Newfoundland because it was the closest landmass. And of course, the stories are when the Titanic was sinking, they could see the signal flares going up from the coast. So there is so much history out there. It's we could spend a whole episode just talking about the island.
Wow. Yeah, no, I did not know that, that's something. That is wild. And so, being 14 years old, that's a pretty, you know, important time of life for a young boy. And so, at that point before that, were you involved in athletics? Did you get into athletics? What group did you land in when you moved, since that was such a big switch for you?
Well, I was always into athletics in school. So when I was living back in Newfoundland, it was hockey, baseball, softball, soccer, gymnastics. I played all sports. I was really big into archery. My father was provincial for Newfoundland. He was a provincial firearms archery instructor. So he also ran the Boys and Girls Club Archery Association. So I'd go on tournaments all around the island, and was very big into archery too. So
Very
when
cool.
when I
And
came to British Columbia,
yeah,
sports was obviously an easy fit. So I was playing volleyball. I was playing, every sport that the school had. Plus, outside of school was hockey. So
that's so interesting. So do you have siblings? Were they able to make that transition too?
I have two sisters. They were really young though when we moved. So the
Okay.
transition was
So
a
it
lot
was
easier for them.
Yeah. Wow. And so would you say then you think sports kind of helped you make that transition? I think, as you said,
hmm
a little bit easier, because that is a big change. Um, sounds like, culturally and everything. Were your parents worried for you and to make sure you were going to going in the right direction and everything?
I guess just like any other parent.
And so would you say you had a pretty stable childhood so that you could make that change y as best as possible?
Well, I survived. I'm still here.
Well, so you say that you survived, and so, I mean, do you ever look back and think, "Wow, I can't believe that happened," or, because that is, I don't know, in that neck of the woods, if it's considered, middle school, high school, or what that is, but where you had to jump in right there during that time.
Well, so provincially in Canada, it just depends on the province that you're in. When I was 14, I'm obviously in grade 9, and in Newfoundland, that's high school. But in British Columbia, high school doesn't start until grade 10. So I got
Okay.
here in grade 10, and so that was high school. It was pretty much the same. It wasn't that much of a transition, but there are a lot of differences between how each province runs their schooling system. So when I got here, there were certain aspects of schooling that I was actually a couple years ahead, and there were other ones that I was a few years behind the curriculum program, just because of how the difference was in schooling back then. So,
Right. You
mhm.
had to figure that out. And so there you said it where you was more of cowboy and oil and things like that in that part of Canada. Was that what you said? Is that
Mhm.
correct?
Yes.
And so I'm naive to those areas in Canada for sure, being in the United States, and I should know this. So it's really cool to understand that the where you moved was, I guess, rich in oil and cowboy type living. I think that's super cool. And so after high school, what did you think? What were your thoughts of what you were going to do after high school?
Well, primarily I was going to join the military, but that didn't go through. I had bad acne as a kid, and of course, the Canadian military wanted me to take this drug called Accutane that's
Yeah.
supposed to get rid of it. But I mean, it came with so many warning labels about
Yes.
liver damage, all of these other things, and I decided no, it wasn't worth it. I wasn't going to jeopardize my health, so I didn't get
Wow.
to do that. And I went from there, immediately joined the. I got into the oil field, started driving truck, water truck in the oil fields up in northern Alberta, and I did that for a while, and then came back here. Kind of bounced around between construction jobs for the next little bit, but then I ended up getting back into Alberta and going back into the oil field. So,
And so I want to ask you about that, but I wanted to go back to because at a young age, in when you're in high school like that, I would think that having the acne, because we've dealt with that in our family too, that you wouldn't you would take the risk. But the fact that in your mind, even at that young age, it wasn't worth you taking the risk
mhm.
of which it's just that's just fascinating to me. Um, that you dealt with it without taking the risk, because most kids, again, at that age would say, "Just do it. I wanna get rid of this." So was that something always that you've always had that? I mean, who instilled that in you, would you say? Or was that just always a part of you?
Well, my mom took that drug for a while, and she didn't like it. She said it was doing weird things to her. So, I mean, she passed on that information to me. You know, you got to be careful. But I thought, you know, is it really worth the risk? And of course, they wanted me to take it. Like the doctor said, he wanted me to take it for 6 months. I was like, that's a long time to be taking this thing every day just to clear up something that is obviously probably going to clear up eventually anyway, which it did.
Yeah.
So I mean, you know, I looked at it, and of course, the list of the side effects. Suicide was one of
Ah,
the biggest side effects. You know, depression
oh,
and suicide. And I'm looking at going, is this really worth it? Like, as much as I would love to join the military, and it was really cool. I went in, I did all of the physical examinations, the aptitude test, the IQ test, and all that stuff that they give you. And they had told me that I was perfect for military intelligence. But you know, when I looked at what they wanted me to do and this drug that they wanted me to take, and I thought about it, and I said, well, is it really worth it? No, it's, you know, I could get into the oil field, and I could probably do a lot better. So that's what I did.
that's so interesting. And so, did you think that that started you on a path as you became an adult also to look more closely at pharmaceuticals and things as well? To look closer, just like you did with the Accutane?
Well, the thing is, I mean, personally, myself, I've always been on the conspiracy side of things. So, you know, from an early on age, my father, you know, he really liked Star Trek and all these science fiction shows, and of course, I would watch those. And then, you know, early on, I was making connections of like, this is kind of almost true to life storylines and technologies. And of course, you know, it was very early on. People started realizing, you know, like William Shatner, Captain Kirk on Star Trek, has had the first cell phone since the 1960s with this little flippy thing, right? So you kind of start seeing things like that. And, you know, as an intelligent young man, you start watching other shows. And of course, you know, one of my favorite shows, Stargate SG1, was filmed right here in BC. And I mean, there's so many connections and correlations with that show to real life incidents, I started very early on, being a conspiracy theorist, so to speak.
Yeah.
And then
Right.
again, I was 21 years old when 9/11 happened. And so I
Okay.
remember exactly where I was that day. I was actually up in the mountains, and I didn't have any radio signal, no cell phone signal. I had no idea what was going on. I was in the middle of a job, and I jumped in my car and I started to or jumped in the truck, and I started to head back down into town. And as I was coming down the mountain, the radio kicked in, and it was crazy. September 11th, all these planes, they're screaming World War. We've just been attacked. So, with my mindset already as it is, I started really looking into it. And of course, I knew right away that something wasn't right because, I mean, if it was a terrorist attack, well, the immediate response was to have police officers in the streets carrying, assault rifles or
Right.
high powered rifles. And I'm thinking, well, if
Yeah.
that's what the terrorists wanted, was to turn America into a police state, that you won, you got it right there. And I knew that was the agenda. I didn't know anything about the Rothschilds or anything like that, like the Rockefellers or any of these plans that they were trying to initiate. I didn't know anything about that stuff, but inside me, I could feel something wasn't right. And at such at a young man's age of 21, I'm sitting
Yeah.
around the table with a bunch of friends and colleagues, that I work with, and we're all discussing this, and they're going to the oh, it's a terrorist attack, and I'm thinking completely opposite of them, and I'm thinking this was an orchestrated thing. This wasn't just some one-off crazy guys on a plane. And of course, when we looked at the Pentagon supposedly being hit by a plane, and then the one that landed in the field, I'm like, yeah, something's not right about this. So that sent me down a journey, and for the next few years, in between work and in my spare time, I was researching a lot. And then it was about the mid 2000s when the movie Zeitgeist, I don't know if you've ever seen that one, was introduced to me.
Oh,
And so that was a documentary film, that was put out back in the mid 2000s, and it was in three portions. It was Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. It was all one movie, but Act 2 was all about 9/11, and talking about how Bushes and the Rockefellers had all orchestrated this. And I was like, yep, this is
wow.
exactly what I was talking about years ago. So I've watched that movie, and then I watched What the Bleep Do We Know, and I started learning about the military industrial complex, getting into a lot of these different topics, and realizing, like, I'd always had the feeling that I was on the right track, and now I definitely know I am. So at that point, it became my absolute hobby outside of work was to be diving into these rabbit holes. And then
And
a
so
few
that's
years,
so
sorry, go
keep
ahead.
going.
Well, it was a few years later, then I come across adrenochrome, and I come across this child satanic stuff. So then
So
I
hold
start
on,
researching that.
because that's huge. I mean, because that was a big leap, you know? And so how that seems to be have been so buried for so long. How did you go? Because I think 9/11 was a for like-minded people like you who had been in the past maybe watching Star Trek and having those thoughts and wondering about those things. It was such an eye opener for folks like you who had the eyes to kind of see it. And so which took you on those other paths, but then to jump into that whole other adrenochrome thing, how did that happen? How did because that's a whole other different deep rabbit hole.
Well, I'm not. I don't subscribe to the same line of thinking as I do now. That when I first found this topic, but of course, like being into the conspiracy world, you're very big into the alien agenda and the aliens, and so you start researching, and you start hearing these buzzwords like adrenochrome, and it's tied in with like reptilians. Now, of course, I
Mhm.
don't follow that anymore because it just makes it sound ridiculous. And some people, and that's just to me, some people out there may disagree, and some people may follow those things. But you know,
Right,
the bottom line is, I mean, they're doing horrible things to children. And if you're going to be the CIA and you're going to want to discredit something, throw in that reptilian stuff, and then you have absolutely discredited it to any normal person that wants to actually research this subject. And because
right,
that this subject has to do with, come years later when Q comes around and we're all finding out that these elites are trafficking children, this adrenochrome stuff is real, they're satanic ritual abuse. So, I mean, throwing that in there makes normal people go, well, yeah, it's just fake. That's conspiracy stuff, reptiles, you know, like who knows? And I'm not saying they're not real. I'm not saying anything like that. I have no proof. But the fact of the matter
Right.
remains, if you want to convince people that there's a real problem, you have to be able to reach them on a believable level that they can understand. Now, later on down that path of their enlightenment and their awakening, and if they start wanting to go down these different rabbit holes, you know, more power to you, because you know what? I found out so much information about things that I didn't know. And it was going down. It was not having fear of going down rabbit holes wherever they
Yeah.
would take you. But the point is you have to be able to discern what was inserted into these rabbit holes to lead you down wrong paths, and
Right.
what's there that's actually true. And then the
Yes.
true things that you can try and help, and you can try and do something about it, right? So I mean, you insert these narratives of like off-world beings or harvesting children. What can you do about that? Well, it's going to come down to, most people are going to agree there's nothing I can do about that. But if you talk about if there's real life people doing this to children, that's a completely different story. And there is something you can do about it, because then you can make other people aware that these crimes are happening. And I mean, look where we are right now in 2025. We're finding out, you know, and of course, I'm not talking about us specifically, because I mean, we've known a lot of this information for the last 8 years. But you look at the normal people, and now they're starting to see it, especially with what happened with Biden and these unaccompanied minor children coming across the border. There's
Right.
300,000 missing children, and as of, you know, a couple days ago, we've rescued, you know, the administration, Trump's administration, has rescued 33,000 of them. That's a
Yeah.
lot. That's a small city.
Yeah.
But where are the rest of them? And of course,
Right.
what was going on for years on different places with different, you know, sick and evil groups. And then of course, I had QEG on my show the other day, and we were discussing these
Yeah.
arrests. And you look at the volume of these arrests that are coming out. This is a
Right.
real problem, and with far-reaching implications, with people who are very high up in positions of power, and
Mhm.
it all the way down to the MS-13 gang members, as Trump has called them before. They're Satanists. They're doing extremely bad things. QAG's highlighted some of these arrests where these guys are performing satanic rituals and sacrificing humans. This stuff is real, and it's been around for a very
Yeah.
long time. But again, when we go back to the alien conversation, I mean, the big thing is like, we start looking back through history. Again, we go down another rabbit hole. We start looking back through history, and we start seeing, what were these gods that people were worshiping, that were asking them to sacrifice humans, that were asking them to sacrifice virgins, that were asking them for child sacrifice? Who are these things? And so we have
Yeah.
Tucker Carlson out there talking about the alien agenda, and how aliens, and Tucker has said this himself, the aliens have always been here.
Yeah.
You know, you can, and Aleister Crowley, I think it was, who had said, you know, we call them angels and demons now, but in the future we'll be called by another name. And it was only a few years later, about a decade or so later, that the Roswell thing happens. And then we start calling them aliens from other worlds. So,
Right.
I mean, you know,
Yeah.
you can start pulling these strings, and making,
Yeah.
connecting these dots all over the place. But
Yeah.
you got to pick and choose your battle, and find the ones that you can do something about. And so, you know, it's always good to always keep putting more information in. Your brain is a sponge that never ends. There's never going to be a
That.
moment where you're like, nope, I can't take anymore. You might have to take
Yeah.
a break for a minute or two, but
Right. And it's funny, as one of the things that I've found as I'm interviewing fellas like you, ladies like you, is that some of the patterns are you do have a brain that has insatiable wanting to find out information, you know? And you're just wanting to find it. But like you said, one thing leads you to another, and you want to continue to learn more about it. Whereas I think that's the difference, where other people who don't see it or don't have that insatiable appetite to find that information. Um, and don't you think, I mean, because when that kind of happened to me, I felt a God presence too, of a protection, as I was looking at all this dark stuff, and I just felt that as well. Um, I want to ask you this more towards the end, but I want to go back. So, working in the oil fields and working with other people, could you talk about this stuff with people around you? Did you end up realizing you couldn't talk about this stuff about people around you? I mean, how was that?
Well, if you knew me personally, I don't really give a crap what other people think. I talk about what I want all the time. And I go, and I
Cool.
don't care. My wife hates it. We'll go into the grocery store during COVID. If I saw somebody with a mask, like I would literally walk up to them and tell them, or at least say it loud enough that they could hear me, that that was ridiculous and it doesn't work. And of course, yeah, I have
Yeah.
no fear when it comes to red pill in the world. And I've always been like this. So, I mean, a lot of people, you know when to carry the conversation, but I mean, like if we're sitting around and we're talking, this is the kind of stuff that I'm talking about. And I know a lot about this stuff, and I'm able to, pull these thoughts, this information out of thin air when talking to people. And so,
Right.
people are always willing to listen because I had a good knowledge base on these topics. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, I never had
Yes.
any fear, and didn't care what people thought about it. You either like it or
Yes.
you don't.
Yes. And so what about with your family? And you said you started out watching Star Trek and with your dad. Could you kind of talk about this stuff, hypotheses and different things with him? And could that continue? I mean, how did that go? Because there have been so many cases where it's separated family members. Um, I was just curious about that with you.
Well, the funny thing is that it was actually my dad that introduced me to Art Bell, and I don't know if you know who Art Bell is.
Yeah. Yes.
He did Coast to Coast Radio years and years ago, which was a show primarily about alien abductions, and it was a late night radio talk show. And so he introduced me to that, and I found that
Okay.
show fascinating. Now I think it's hosted by George Norrie. Um, if he's still around, I haven't watched that show in a long time, or listened to that show in a long time. But that was primarily the topic of conversation, and he used to be very much interested in that. And of course, when we moved here to British Columbia, the X-Files had just started on television, so that was another show that I got really, and it was all filmed here in British Columbia. So for the first like
That's
6 years
right.
of that show, it was all filmed just down the road, kind of thing. Um, but he kind of went out of it, and now he's a mainstream media believer. But my mom, on the other hand, is a complete conspiracy theorist along with me, and she's out there screaming about all the same things that I am. So,
Oh,
it's weird. And when COVID came, she knew exactly what was going on. She packed up, got a bus, fixed it up into an RV, moved out into the woods and the mountains and the Rocky Mountains, and then she's now raising chickens, pigs, and living completely off grid. So, while my dad is sitting there and he's triple vaxxed and he, hates Trump, believes everything the media says, and I'm like, what happened to you, old man? So,
how could that be? That's so fascinating. And I've heard stories like this too, where the parents have completely flipped, and good for your mom. And so I wonder why, since you started your journey with your dad and this, and then he's completely flipped. Why, what do you think he bought into that your mom didn't? That's just so fascinating.
see, it's hard to say because, again, with what I was talking about, with like going down these certain rabbit holes, and then you hit paths where the craziest stories come in. And I'll give the perfect example again. This is reptilian aliens, blah blah blah. This kind of stuff. And of course, my mom got lost down in that rabbit hole for quite some time, and it drove my dad crazy. That this would be her argument to everything. Oh, those guys on the news, they're all reptiles. I'm like, you can't convince somebody if you're going to be telling them that, because you sound crazy, right?
Yeah.
You want to make it somewhat believable, and you're just telling the truth. Like, what have these guys done wrong, right? They're not telling you
Yeah.
the truth. That's all you got to say. And of
Right.
course, to start off a conversation by going that far down the hole, I mean,
Yeah.
you're taking people on a journey that most people, their cognitive dissonance kicks in, they completely reject it. And of course, that among other things has ended my parents' marriage. And so,
Okay.
my dad went his separate way, my mom went her separate way. And it wasn't just about the conspiracy stuff. I mean, there's other things that's personal. I'm not really
Right.
going to get into it, but
Yeah.
that played a big factor. I mean,
Yeah.
especially for my dad, he looks at it and he's just he doesn't want to touch it. COVID comes along though, and everybody's forced to wake up. You remain asleep, you become a slave to the matrix, you're getting all those boosters, you're getting those shots, you're wearing your mask all the time. It's ridiculous. And of course, the stupid thing is too is that my dad was in the oil field with me, and of course I was a firefighter while I was working in the oil field as well. So I was,
Oh, wow.
I was taking medical courses, learning how to do pandemic responses. This was only a few years before the pandemic broke out. And so when the pandemic did break out and they're telling people to wear masks, and I'm like, I've done pandemic response training. Like, this isn't going to help you. Like, I know
Mhm.
exactly. I've had to wear the spacesuit with the oxygen tank, like I've had to do that stuff. And so I knew right away, like what they were saying was bullshit. Sorry. But it
Okay.
was. And,
Yeah.
and, we knew right away there was something wrong with it. So, I mean, you saw a separating of wheat and chaff, I guess you could say.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. And so knowing that knowledge though, and knowing, and with your dad knowing that you're a firefighter and understood all that, he still something kept him from s- seeing it enough that he was got the shot and all that kind of stuff. It's just so interesting to me. And so what does he think now, or would he share that with you about what you're doing, and all of what's happening?
To a certain degree, he's still not willing to admit it. You have to understand, like, I see what happened to him as being uh, the direct result of Mockingbird media programming. So for the last
Yes.
8 years since Trump came in, of course, he was anti-Trump right away because all he watches is the news and the late night
Oh,
comedians. And so whatever they're
oh,
repeating is all he sees. And so that is, he was directly targeted by this Mockingbird media, and his reaction is a typical perfect example of what happens when that's where all you're getting your information and you trust nothing else. You don't want to do the research, and you don't want to look down any other rabbit hole. But again, look what led into before COVID happened, and look what
right,
happened with the lead into Trump getting into office. You had fact checkers start appearing and telling people, okay, we're the fact checkers, this is fake and blah blah blah. So I mean, like, as for him, this was, he was directly affected by this, and his opinion and his outward look on things was directly affected by this Mockingbird media, and it caused him to believe everything that they were saying, because he'd been told for years, i.e. the Mockingbird constantly repeating itself over and over again, that this is the way things are and we're the government, we're here to help you. He didn't look into anything. Whereas someone with an open mind who wants to get to the bottom of things, a
right.
problem solver, by nature, wants to learn
Yes,
and wants to get a second opinion. So,
right. Yeah, and it's just so interesting, which, that Mockingbird Media saw the first couple drops on Q, which I'm relearning on Q for Dummies with Abs. His show is awesome too. It really, obviously it's a huge factor to your point, because all that programming that's put out there for people who aren't willing, again, to reiterate what you said, to look at it and question it by nature, are going to believe it, and then they're not going to go out of that narrative because it changes their whole life outlook, and that's
hmm
scary,
hmm
you know? And so where you are, tell me too, so obviously your wife then obviously understands what's going on, but just has to probably tamper you sometimes when you guys are out. But she's all on board and understands all this.
well, that's funny, and I'll give you a little story about how we met. So,
Yes.
when I was working in the oil field, it's you're living in a crew house. You're living. I was from British Columbia. I was working and living in northern Alberta. So, the company that I was working for foot the bill for a house for us to live in, the employees. And
Right.
so I didn't really know anybody. It's minus 40 outside in the wintertime. So I was playing a video game, and it's an online video game, players all around the world. And of course, I met my wife through that video game, and we spend all day playing the game together, and we start talking about different topics. And of course, we got to know each other a lot better. We fell in love. And then when we started talking about, getting married, we knew something. One of the things that we talk about all day long was we knew something was wrong under Obama. We knew Hillary was coming, and we knew that this was really not good. Where she was living when we first met, she was living just outside of where NASA was, where they would send the space shuttles. and
Okay.
NASA had shut down under Obama. And so the city where
Uh,
she was living in Florida was just drying up. The county, sorry, she's right here. The county where she was living was drying up because NASA was now shut down. And so we knew something
wow.
was terribly wrong. So I said, well, why don't you come up here to Canada and live with me? I got a good job and we're on farmland, and if anything happens, World War III breaks out, we're pretty well stocked up here with fresh water and food and whatever else. So brought her to Canada, and that's we're she's my teammate in this whole thing. Like, I wouldn't probably be still doing this if it wasn't for her. It's so much easier, going through COVID, going through all of this stuff, finding Q, learning about John Podesta, Hillary Clinton, all these things, when you have somebody else there that's sharing this with you. So for me, it wasn't a journey all by myself. I had support with me. So
What a blessing. And I think that's a rarity because I think a lot of people are more by themselves, and that's why they've really w- rely on the podcasts and things that you all are doing because they don't have anyone at home. So yay for your wife. Woohoo! That's fantastic. I'm so glad you guys can do this together. It's so wonderful. And so in where you are living, you said you moved. Explain that to me again. So you moved away and then you moved back to where you originally originally had moved to.
mhm.
Where were you in the middle when you were doing the oil stuff?
Northern Alberta.
Okay. And is that different from where you
Oh
are now?
yes,
Where
very
you
much so. It's cowboy country up there. Cowboy and oil field rig hands. Like it's um, Alberta is a different place. You go there, it's flatland prairies, uh, bogs and swamps, and on the west side of the province, and you have the start of the Rocky Mountains. So there's this huge
Oh,
mountain wall of Rocky Mountains on one side, and then cattle ranches and big empty fields of farmland. Um,
okay.
and very low populated. Like, I think the entire province, which is Alberta's, like, Canadian provinces are pretty big. Most Americans don't get this. The provinces themselves, I mean, British Columbia is such a huge landmass. I think it's almost bigger than Texas is. So Texas is a pretty big place.
Yeah.
Same thing with Alberta. Alberta is huge. Saskatchewan is huge. Manitoba is huge. Ontario is even bigger than the other provinces. It's the biggest one. So I mean,
Mhm.
you only have a population across the entire country of Canada. It's just about 40 million people, but you have the second largest land mass on the entire planet. There's a lot of wide open space up here.
Yeah, that is wild. And so where you are now is how is that different where you are now?
Well, I live in the southern interior of British Columbia.
Okay.
So it's in between the Cascade Mountains and the Rocky Mountains on the other side. So we're in a valley.
Oh,
Where I currently live, where I've been living for the last few years, is right in the middle of farmland. There's horses all around us, farm pastures, dairy farms, chicken farms, any type of farm you can think of. So I'm right in the middle of farmland. But uh, there's some pretty big cities just south of us here. Nothing in the millions, but I mean, they're fairly big cities. But um, it's a beautiful spot, and I mean, the place is called the Okanagan. It's called the Okanagan Valley, and it's one of the most
okay.
beautiful places in all of Canada. If you come
Wow.
here, it looks geographically, it's a lot like Southern California, and it's
Oh,
and it's one of the
wow.
hottest places in all of Canada too. So our temperatures right now, we're running up into the 100 degrees, 90 degrees in the summertime. So, and of course, this place also has the longest growing season in all of Canada too. So tons of orchards here.
Wow. I mean, that sounds beautiful. And I'm so glad your wife took a leap of faith and came up there. That's fantastic. So one of the main things I think that brings people together who have the eyes to see and the curiosity is their faith. And so I'm curious for you when your faith and spirituality and stuff started to grow. What time of life, and was it a slow type of thing or did something hit you? Um, how did that go for you?
When I was born, I was, christened and baptized as a child in the United Church, so I was Protestant. Um, my aunt and her husband, my uncle, were ministers, so I grew up in a religious family. But as I got older, I got away from that, and I became, I hate to say it, I became an atheist. I believed in science. I thought I was going the right path. I delved deeply into science and evolution, and memorized all the facts, and I could spit out that stuff at an early age, 10 years old, and I'm spitting out, fruit flies and how the evolution of, species and stuff like that. But it wasn't until I didn't return to God until I found Q. It wasn't until I found Q that I realized, because I was thinking the entire time when I was researching the alien stuff and going through down those rabbit holes, and I'm thinking, that this was that. But when I started to realize what was really going on, and especially with the satanic ritual abuse with the children, I realized, I knew who we're fighting, which was the enemy.
Yeah, right.
And the only way to fight that is to go back to God. And so I accepted Jesus into my heart. I repented for my sins, and came full circle right back. And now it's the main driving point of my life. So that's why I grew up my
Yay!
hair and have my beard.
I love it. It looks great. Yes. And that's I keep hearing that story, and there are biblical references and in passages in Q
Mhm.
drops, and then that correlated with understanding it's a spiritual war. I think it's amazing how that journey has brought you full circle. And 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 I'm hearing that over and over, and I do feel like I feel like that, some of the rabbit holes we end up going down, you have to have that armor of God in order to look at it and not absorb it. Don't you agree?
Absolutely. You you can't put yourself in a position to be researching satanic ritual abuse and all of these super dark topics without having that armor on, because otherwise you're
Yeah,
going to destroy your mind. And so that
that's
only
right.
level of protection that you gain from this is knowing that you're on God's team, and you have to know about this, because in order to stop it, there is no weapon formed against you that shall prosper, right?
Yes.
And so, you put on that armor of God, and he will protect you. And so that gives you
Abs
strength to be able to go down these rabbit holes of very, very dark information that, for the most part, you tell a lot of people about this stuff, and they say, I don't want to think about it. It's too horrible. I can't think about this stuff. Well, you need to, because if you don't, who's going to speak up for the kids? As JFK said,
That's
if
right.
not who, if not us, who? If not now, when?
That's right. That's exactly right. That's and I'm so that's why I'm doing this, to talk to people like you, because I'm telling you, you're a warrior. I admire you. This is the most incredible time in history. We are dealing with subjects that are the greatest joy and prize of children to be saved, and it's and it my heart is full, and I know the the digital warriors like you are so important in all of this. And so it's definitely been an honor to talk to you. I want to put this back up again because your show is live every Tuesday. Is that right? 7 Eastern, or
Yes.
tell me the time.
So it's Tuesday nights, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific.
Okay. And it's a really great show, and again, you have great guests, and the way you interact, and all of you have so much information, and it's just super cool. And I just appreciate you so much, and for everything you're doing, and I know you will, but continue doing it, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Take care, and I really, really appreciate the time.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.